Alright, welcome to part 2 of the Hazbin Hotel Steampunk Redesign series, where I present each member of the main cast as an oracle card and simultaneously give them a tarot reading to help carve out their place in this alternate universe. Before we take a look at the King of Hell himself, I want to clarify a few things about this world in the form of little fun facts. 1. There are no phones in this world other than the payphones and landline phones. As I mentioned in my Alistair video, television only reached its stages of infancy and never evolved past that, so modern technology doesn't exist. 2. Because of this, Valentino is the strongest overlord of the V's instead of Vox, followed by Velvet. Vox is an underdog in this universe, but is by no means powerless. He will have a few tricks up his sleeve. By that logic, Alistair still reigns true as a sovereign overlord, with his power over radio maintaining its overwhelming relevance. To top things off, he also boasts a wonderful relationship with the cannibal overlord Rosie, who oversees Hell's newspaper industry. Quite the power duo. Alright, with those tidbits out of the way, let's take a look at Lucifer Morningstar. I said in part 1 of this series that each character would be getting 4 oracle/tarot cards to flesh out their character, but Lucifer will be getting an obligatory 5th card. At the end of the tarot reading, I like to add a bit more lore about the steampunk universe, but Lucifer is so intertwined with the world itself that it felt right to draw another card and incorporate it into the steampunk world building. One cannot exist without the other. Before we get into the story, I'll go over Lucifer's design. This section will be a little bit shorter than Alistair's since story drove my vision for Lucifer more than his outward appearance did, but I would still like to go over my major changes. During this time lapse, you'll see me struggle in the beginning with his pose. I was married to the stance I gave him in his thumbnail, and it ended up bothering me for reasons I couldn't understand. It wasn't until I made the decision to make his pose a lot more flashy that the character started to resemble Lucifer in the way I wanted. Despite the serious nature of his role in the story, I wanted him to retain his canonical showmanship flair. As for his outfit, I had a very specific color ratio in mind. I'm not opposed to his canon colors, but I already decided long before I began these illustrations that gold would play a huge part in every design, so Lucifer is no exception. I got rid of the white overcoat and made it an ethereal red that complemented his horns and wings. You can't see it here, but I imagine that those golden lines snake around his back and frame the points at which his wings expand and retract. Something like this. The coat itself is a more direct reference to a ringmaster than the canon version, which plays into the grimsicle Victorian setting. Think the golden compass meets the greatest showman mixed with a good serving of arcane. I made the inner lining of his coattails black as well as his shirt, which is fastened by a golden metallic bow tie. The bow tie holds a specific significance to Lucifer, but that story is a secret for now. His hat doesn't make an appearance in this version, but I did give him a thin golden crown that he holds in his hand in the illustration. It's subtle and delicate, mirroring how he approaches the politics of hell. In comparison, for example, Lilith's crown would be a lot more oppressive and ornate to match her sheer force in the royal landscape. A few fun facts about his design: he has a duck with a top hat hanging from his vest where a watch should be, because of course I had to add at least one, and his shoes look normal, but he actually has hooves, therefore the toes in his boots are just for show to make his feet look normal. I originally wanted to add some clockwork accessories to Lucifer's wings, but the extra details ended up making the overall image look too busy, so I settled on 3 golden braces. He cannot take these off, and they will play a part in his story down the line. I noticed that their placements are eerily similar to the way the braces on Alistair's antlers are situated, which is a complete accident, but it's something that I may turn into a plot point. Lastly, similar to Charlie, I have Lucifer designed to always have his horns out. I think that he can hide them when he wants to, but I decided to have this world appreciate the display, and therefore it's normalized for the royal family. Now, with that out of the way, why don't we get into the lore of the Serpent of Hell? Lucifer, the devil. Card 1. Current relationship with life. The Wise One, representing tradition and order. It may be time for Lucifer to set aside his creativity, put away that fiery, mad tinkerer that got them all into this pit in the first place. Charlie has put a lot of faith in him and invited him to live amongst her friends at the hotel. Tradition could be the way to go. He knows how to handle the politics of hell and persistent badgering of heaven, but it's all become incredibly tedious. That isn't to say that he didn't break traditional conventions on the norm. In fact, his borderline inherent desire to do so was what had Lilith taking Charlie far away from him all those years ago. And then he'd disrupted tradition again when he reacted by shirking his duties and wasting away in his library. It wasn't a total loss of time. Ever since Charlie was born, Lucifer had turned his eye away from the world of man in favor of focusing on her successful adaptation to the punishing environments of hell. So, during the 150 years Lilith took Charlie away to a life on the stage, Lucifer caught up on 100 years of human history to distract himself. He really didn't like what he saw. It nearly radicalized him, in a way. Then, he heard what Charlie was trying to do for humans, what his daughter was putting her life on the line to achieve, and it just about blinded him with terror. Heaven wasn't forgiving, and neither were the humans she was fighting to defend. On second thought, maybe it wasn't tradition he should be upholding, but perhaps it was about time to become a menace to society. Playing nice to keep hell safe from heaven for the last 10,000 years was starting to look like a pointless sacrifice. Maybe it was time to be the devil they wanted him to be, and he would start by seeing if these sinners at Charlie's hotel were worthy of her kindness. If they weren't, then, well, they had better hope he's in a forgiving mood when the time comes. Card 2, the Serpent's Clock. The Chiromancer, representing delivering news and collaboration. Lucifer has a secret, which is nothing new to him, but now that he's around Charlie, the guilt is starting to eat him alive. It might be time to tell her the truth, to reveal that wicked, butchered part of him that he's kept under lock and key for so many millennia. He struggles to find the courage to lay his ugliness bare for Charlie to see, but the more they become involved with heaven, the closer his secret comes to revelation without his help. What will they all say if he's exposed by the enemy, made untrustworthy by the family that cast him out in front of his ever-trusting daughter? Against heaven, their unity in hell had to be steadfast and unyielding. He could not let heaven take that away from them by using their unfair knowledge of his struggles to forge a rift between them. It isn't that Charlie and her friends are unaware of his secret, it's just that they don't know it's his secret to keep. You see, since the beginning, every 1,000 years, a basilisk would appear on the night Hell's pentagram moon eclipsed heaven's light. Large enough to encircle the entirety of the Pride Ring, the snake was the catalyst for some of the worst hellquakes the Seven Rings had ever seen by its existence alone. Its scales were pearly white and hid a pulsing, angry red that could be seen between them as it moved. Boeotian royalty would tell stories of how their ancient kings had gotten close enough to the beast to see that the red oozed out like blood, dyeing the soil red. The blood of humanity, they called it. Glorious and all-consuming, old overlords would explain to new souls, blocking out the sky and thinning out the most wretched of us. They would speak with a reverence that was unnerving to younger souls, but how could they understand if they hadn't witnessed it themselves? Some called it Jormungandr, the Norse serpent of old who gnawed at the roots of Yggdrasil. It culls the most rotten of souls so that the tree won't collapse, those in the Doomsday District would say. The other sins had their suspicions that the serpent was Lucifer, but none dared ask. After all, who else could it be? Who else had such raw, arcane power strong enough to control a form that colossal? The night that marked 1,000 years was fast approaching, and Charlie was soon to witness the beast consuming her people for the first time. How in the three realms to heaven and back was Lucifer to tell her that he was the monster, and that there was nothing he could do to prevent its arrival? Card 3. Relationship with the other guests. The Pilgrim, representing opportunities and growth. At first, Lucifer doesn't know what to make of the odd troop of misfits Charlie has brought under her wing. When he'd initially come to see what had become of his daughter's passion project, he'd truly expected to despise the lot of them. It was infuriating, being unsure of how to weigh their souls. He could try to read them, look past the veil and glimpse into their pasts to try to sniff out their dirty secrets. But not only would that make him a terrible hypocrite, but also a liar. Long ago, he'd promised Lilith that he would not breach the privacy of human souls in that way, for it was a power that invited misery far more often than it provided clarity. So he wouldn't breach their privacy. However, Lilith was always the one who took the role of coaxing out the intentions of sinners and hellborn alike. Lucifer was abysmal at judging souls' intentions at face value. It was vexing being forced to actually mingle with these sinners to get a feel for them. He didn't do socializing. It wasn't great for either party in his experience. Then again, maybe it was time for him to slow down. He'd spent so much time simply existing that he hadn't allowed himself the courtesy of appreciating the present. Sure, he lived day to day after Charlie was born, but it didn't take long for him to lose his grip on time and reality both after she was taken away. Seeing what these mortal souls had to teach him might not be such a horrible thing, right? Even Alistair, whom Lucifer knew very well was not entirely selfless in his involvement with Charlie, provided him with some interesting new perspectives on life. Over the last 10,000 years, he'd picked up and dropped one project after another, avoided his duties as king, and all but hollowed out until he was a shell of the light bringer he was born to be. Maybe it was time that he saw a project through and really devoted himself to getting to know these people so that he may better support Charlie in her impossibly dangerous endeavor. As he does so, pieces of his old self might slowly come back, and maybe he may finally remember who he really is. Card 4, the Archangel Lucifer, the adventurer, representing responsibility and expectations. Looking at Charlie was like looking into an old, dusty mirror. The reflection was familiar, but just uncanny enough, just glazed enough to be foreign. On nights Charlie got the group together to tell stories while eating treats, Lucifer would often feel a pang of nostalgia shatter his serenity. Where it was coming from, he wasn't sure, but it had nearly brought him to tears on multiple occasions. He suspected it was the person he used to be that had come back to haunt him. Samael, the Archangel, the bringer of the morning star. Back then, he'd been a true force of optimism with the tendency towards the dramatics. The other archangels found him rather exhausting, a sentiment that Lucifer saw mirrored in Charlie's friends. The difference was they looked upon her with a sort of resigned affection. They loved her theatrics and passion. Sometimes, when he thought about heaven, he would try to pinpoint exactly when everything had gone wrong. Exactly when was it that he crossed the line of no return? He'd been shoved from the gates of heaven before he was ready, before he was fully aware of the responsibility he then shouldered. Then again, he'd charged headlong towards his fate when he realized the potential of humanity. If he had known what would be waiting for him, should he break the rules, would he have done the same thing? Would he do it again? Yes. 1,000,000 times over, yes. He'd do anything for Charlie, even if it meant carving out a new future with his dying breath. It was exposing Charlie to a world where he needed to do such a thing that was giving him pause. She needed his help to work with heaven, yes, and he wanted nothing more than to give it to her. But the ghosts that haunted his nightmares awaited him there, faces whose delicate features he'd long forgotten. All that remained in his mind's eye was after-images of their perfect white teeth smiling at him in spite as his sentence was passed. Above all, Michael awaited him there, and he knew that the instant he took a main role in Charlie's mission to shatter the foundations of heaven and hell, well, there would be hell to pay. But his hesitancy was actively draining his daughter's light and her faith in him. He could see her interpreting his lack of action as cowardice, no matter how valiantly she tried to hide it. Lucifer was afraid, but not for himself. What he hadn't considered was the difference between his act of rebellion 10,000 years ago and now. Now he had Charlie. Now he had the very humans he sacrificed his purpose for on his side. They had a fresh perspective and a unique outlook on their situation that Lucifer couldn't tap into before. If he asked for their help, opened up just a little about his fears, maybe he could turn this fight to their favor without the bloodshed that started it all. Card 5, the Clock Tower, the Poet, representing relationships and vulnerability. Lucifer has been isolated for a long time, hidden away in the forgotten halls amongst archaic tomes and magic artifacts, none of which could hope to match him in age. The entire thing is against his nature. He is a poet, a romantic, with a love for the new and undiscovered. but his very being is stifling to those around him. He tried to be himself in the beginning, but his presence only reminded the other sins and royal families of hell that the inciting incident which began their life in the universe was merely an act of disobedience of a young angel. They see him as a disturbing insight on how frivolous their existence is to a celestial. He makes them feel small. In turn, Lucifer found that it makes them insufferable to work with, so Lilith did most of that. Wallowing in his uselessness had him falling further and further into a recluse lifestyle, idly tinkering away with creation magic and trinkets day in and day out. So much so that he lost track of time. Sort of. It was hard for him to forget when a slow ticking was always there, clicking in the recess of his mind in torturous repetition. See, he didn't just hide away from the limelight out of shame, but for hell's very survival. Unlike the mystery of the serpent, of which many of his peers already suspect him the culprit, there was another secret he kept. One that no one had ever even considered. In fact, no one ever thought they should. There lay a clock tower in the center of Pentagram City, one that has run since the beginning of time as Hell's inhabitants know it. No one knows where it came from, not even Lucifer. But if he knows one thing, it's that tower is the clock that ticks in the back of his mind, its existence connected to his own in some inconceivable way. He knows this because the day Charlie was born, she was born still. He had feverishly poured every ounce of his light, his strength into her frail form to bring her life, briefly sacrificing the invincibility that came with his eternal life. In that moment of weakness, the clock tower skipped a second. It had never faltered up to that point, or since. So minuscule was the mistake that not even the conspiracy theorists who studied the phenomena of the clock tower noticed, but Lucifer did. He realized that night that his mortality was intertwined with that tower, and since the very weave of the 7 rings was tied to his spirit, so was hell's very foundation. And so, he kept himself away from prying eyes when duty allowed him. Less people around him meant less questions, and less questions meant it was less likely his secret would ever come out. But now, with his investment in Charlie's mission, he had to risk vulnerability. Actually, he didn't expect his secret tie to the clock tower to be an issue amongst Charlie's friends. That is, until Alistair, his daughter's wily and unreadable host, began to look at him differently. His eyes held a hunger that only a man driven by desperation could muster, and Lucifer suspected then that the radio demon had figured out something he shouldn't, and he wanted to know how. Welcome back from the archives, good listeners. So, obviously, there are a few loose ends from Alistair's video that I didn't tie off in Lucifer's lore. I did that on purpose because it wouldn't be fun to give you all the answers right off the bat, would it? But there are a couple things that I want to go ahead and clarify. The quote-unquote curse on the clock tower, as dubbed by the sinners, that makes any who step within it instantly vanish is a mystery. Lucifer didn't place that curse on the tower, and not even he knows where those souls vanished to. He's capable of sensing every human soul in hell, so he knows that any sinner that disappears into the clock tower is gone for good. After they step inside, he can't feel them anymore, and he's really disturbed by this fact. The idea that there might be a domain of hell that he isn't privy to keeps him up at night on occasion. Alistair's tie to the clock tower is what has him looking at Lucifer oddly. Just like the curse on the clock tower, Lucifer is just as clueless about Alistair's soul being drawn towards it. While the clock tower is connected to Lucifer's life, he has little to no power over it, which is why he found it imperative to keep that information a secret. If anyone malevolent were to try and kill him by finding a way to destroy the tower, then all of hell would pay for the aftermath. Also, regarding Lilith, she is still missing in this universe, but I think that she's in heaven as she is in canon. I haven't decided exactly what role she would play in this world yet, so if I end up doing a card for her, I'll explain it then. As for the timeline of events, this does still take place right after Adam's attempt at extermination on Charlie's hotel. Adam did not, in fact, die, but Lut thought he did and still took his halo back to heaven, which puts our first man in an odd position. But he is a prisoner, and for now they put him in the basement. So now that the illustration is getting pretty close to completion, let's talk about a few more design elements. I added the clock as one of Lucifer's main motifs, placing one under his feet and more within his frame. I really like the clock aesthetic to pair with Lucifer's in a steampunk universe. Time really is such an odd subject when associated with Lucifer to begin with due to his impossibly long life, so it only felt right to have it be his signature. For those who listen to Epic the musical, I would have the ticking of a clock or the mention of one signify Lucifer's presence or reference his influence, similar to how Athena's quick thought is introduced. Also, in case it's important to some of y'all, Lucifer isn't wearing gloves. His hands are just blackened after his fall. He does, in fact, have red nails, and that makes me extremely happy. Alright, if you stuck around to the end, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of this AU so far, and let me know if you enjoyed this format. I'm trying to improve with each and every video, so your feedback means a lot to me. Leave a like and say hi in the comments if you're up for it. It helps out a ton. If you saw this video before part 1 of the series, I'll have it linked at the end. Charlie is up next. I haven't decided if I want to do her and Vaggie together in the same video yet, so I guess it'll be a surprise. Alright, without further ado, let's take a look at the King of Hell himself, Lucifer, the Devil. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay safe out there. I'll see you guys in the next one. Ciao!